Welcome to the Book Bungalow's virtual webinar for 3 winners of this year's Writers of the Future contest. Each year, new sci-fi and fantasy authors and illustrators are discovered through the annual L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers and Illustrators of the Future contest, the biggest science fiction and fantasy awards program in the world. We are pleased today to present 3 of these winning writers virtually as they talk about their stories featured in volume 39, the latest edition of the annual publication that comes out after each award season. Isn't that a beautiful cover? Volume 39 is available for purchase either online through our website or in our bookstore, and I'll put the link to order the book in the chat room shortly. This year's edition was edited by Jody Lynn Nye and Dean Wesley Smith and features bonus short stories plus art and writing tips from Kevin J. Anderson, Lazarus Chernick, Christine Catherine Rush, and S.M. Sterling. As we proceed with discussion, please feel free to put any questions you might have for any particular author or all the authors in the Q&A. And I'll try to get to them when possible before we conclude. With us this afternoon are 3 writers: Marianne Xenos, who's represented by the cat. She can explain that when she comes on. TJ Knight and Jason Palmatier, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Let me introduce Marianne first. Why don't you come on, Marianne?
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And why don't you tell everyone what that cat is?
It's an ancient cat playing a harp, and I do a lot of Zooms, and so I change my profile avatar every few days to something goofy. And I just happen to like that cat playing a harp, and I like that it's very, very ancient. And of course, I can't remember where I found it. So,
okay. All right. Well, Marianne Xenos is the author of Moonlight and Funk. She's a writer and visual artist living in Western Massachusetts. She works with mixed media, photography, and fiction. She's a member of an artist-run gallery and creates artwork with a strong sense of fantasy and narrative. You know, I didn't look at it before, but did you like what they came up with for the illustration for your story?
I adore that illustration, and April Solomon, who did that illustration, is such a talented artist. I felt like it was one of the most exciting parts of this. The whole thing is exciting, but the illustration just thrilled me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
She, although she's been writing since she first learned to read, she only began sending out her stories for publication in the past 1.5 years. Is that right?
Now it's 2 years since. Yeah.
In 2021, she published her first short story and was a finalist for Writers of the Future. Was this your first short story?
No.
Oh, okay.
I sent the first one out, but that first one got published, but then I sent a different one to Writers of the Future, and that one was a finalist. So, yeah.
She grew up in a blue-collar family outside of Boston. Her childhood was full of immigrants, builders, and working-class heroes, people who inspired the characters in her stories. Her father was a heavy equipment operator who moved to Key West to look for gold with only moderate success. He introduced her to treasure hunters, conches, and deep-sea fishing. Her mother, who never left New England if she could help it, taught her to dance as soon as she could walk. Everything from Greek line dances to the cha-cha. Now, is your mother Greek?
My mother's Greek.
Yeah. I was born when we were living in Greece, but we were only there for my first 2 years. So her story, Moonlight and Funk, began as a prompt in a writing workshop. The 2 main characters, a beachcombing vampire and a wounded dragon, were randomly assigned, and Marianne developed the rest of the story from imagination and personal experience. While writing the story, she drew on her father's love of Key West, her daughter's little yellow dog, and a longtime appreciation of dance music. So I have about several questions. I say
Okay.
4, but some of them are double questions. When the description said that your 2 characters were randomly assigned in the prompt, I wondered if that prompt also supplied gender for the vampire. And if
That's a
not,
very good question.
yeah, and sorry, that's not the one I sent you, but it
No,
occurred
it's
to
not.
me
It's a
later.
good, but it's a good question because I
So what
played a
made
little
you
bit with gender.
decide? What made you
Mhm.
decide to have make Aveen female?
Well, you know, what the prompt gave me mostly was a dragon who had a wounded scale and a
Okay.
vampire who was from Basra. That
Oh,
was the
that's where
prompt.
the Middle East comes in.
And except I want to say that prompt sort of dropped into my writing. I was writing about the Middle East. I've been writing about magic and about magical systems starting in Sumer. And so I had already this obsession, and then the prompt came. And maybe, I mean, I think the thing about prompts, I have a notebook full of prompts. Some of them flourish and some of them just get put away. And that one came to life for me, partly because I got very interested in Basra. Then
Yeah.
I got so interested in the dragons. And then I decided they had to be from a similar place. So I think I wrote the vampire as a female because it's easier for me to write my main point of view character as a female.
Okay.
She, I don't know, she has aspects that actually make me feel they're a little bit like me as a teenager. Not, I didn't kill people, but that there are certain aspects of her impulsiveness and her hitchhiking and her time in Key West and her love of Key West that, you know, so those things came forward. And I also think that there are just some ways that she addresses sort of the pain in her life that felt very female to me as I wrote them.
Okay.
So, but that was partly just because that was the first way she popped into my head, but I wasn't assigned a gender for either character.
Okay. Was there any difference or a lot of difference between your first finished version and this one that ended up winning?
Well, I would say that I take workshops with Nina Kariki Hoffman, who I believe is here listening. So hello, Nina. And she plays a lot with these prompts with 20-sided dice, which is really fun. And so what we have is a story cookbook, and you roll up ingredients with the dice.
Oh, cool.
So I got a lot of ingredients. Some of them dropped away. Some of them stayed in the story. My first writing session, I got 500 words, and the story wound up being 4,500 words. So a lot of those things built later, because also as I thought about Aveen, especially what happens to her in the story, that there were certain parts that became very important to me. And so, but those grew later. I think it took me, it took me a few months to write the story, and the prompt was like I don't know what, like dropping seeds
Yeah.
and seeing what sprouts.
Yeah, that's cool. I I grew up in Iraq. I
That's
spent 5
interesting.
years of my childhood in Baghdad.
Mhm.
So that's why I was curious why
Right.
you chose to set it there, and have references to Arabic. Um, so is there a tradition of vampires?
I don't think
I
so.
think you just
I
kind
think
of
I made that up, but
okay.
I think though that it's really possible. And then that that time in Iraq, that time in Basra was during, there was a slave uprising, and it was a time of chaos.
Uh-huh.
And I think that if people are going to be turned and nobody noticed, if people are going to become vampire and then be able to work their way, chaos is very good for monsters, right? So I
Yeah.
think that the time period I was given was when it made a lot of sense for there to be a vampire. And do I have time to tell you a very quick story about my relationship to the Middle East?
Sure.
Okay, so my grandparents are Greek, and and Greece to me is this bridge between Europe and the Middle East. And when
That's
you're in Greece, and I know you've spent a lot of time in Greece, that people have different body language. It's not European. It's very much not European. It's very Middle Eastern. And I didn't quite realize that. And so there's a family that's Syrian that runs a restaurant near me. And we used to go in there a lot and see them, and they would call me cousin because I'm, and they would give me food that tasted like my grandmother's food. And this young man played me a song by Armenians who were living in Aleppo, who were playing traditional Greek music and recording it in Norway and bringing it back to Syria.
Yeah.
And I thought, when he said that, I thought, we're really cousins. This is really like these strands of culture that get all tangled up. And I think that part of the world is like that.
It is. There was so much trade and back and forth. I also finished high school in Lebanon, so yeah, you're right on there. Can you talk a little bit more about the aspects of the story that reflect your own experience or the experiences of people you know? I know you said your father treasured.
Well, I think that you can feel the nostalgia in there for Key West, because the time that my dad lived in Key West was the golden age, and he went down there with when Mel Fisher was looking for gold, and he worked for Mel Fisher, and he found like a little bit of gold, but nothing. He didn't find the big bunch. And it was a really ideal place. I would go down and stay with him, and I would have a bike and bike all over the island. So that part of it feels that nostalgia. And then there's also, I've known a lot of addicts. I wanted it to be clear that Aveen was making a really hard decision, not just to be human, but to not kill, and that she was making a decision that she would no longer live on the blood of living things. And so in writing it, I didn't want to make it heavy-handed, but I really also saw it on some way as a recovery story.
True.
And that she was making her hardest choice came before the end of the story. Her hardest choice was when she didn't kill the man with the coin. And then when she chose to tell the truth. I also felt that was a thing that addicts do sometimes. It's also the lie, that there's often a thing of deflecting, that she did it, she took responsibility, she told the truth, like she made amends. So in that way, I mean, I haven't talked about this a lot, but I see it as a recovery story. And so in that way, that's a way that I hope people get from the story.
That's cool. That's great. Have you got any other writing projects going on? Anything published or near publication?
I do. I'm working on a book that's going to take a long time. So there is that, but the book continues.
It's a novel?
Yeah, I have a novel that I'm working, and it's 1983 in Boston, with a lot of these kinds of characters. I have there's a family, a very working class kind of Boston family, but then they're also magical people. So it's two worlds coming together.
So it'll be fantasy?
It's fantasy and a lot of world building and a lot of magical people and dancing, which I insist on. So there will be dancing. And then I've published, I'm a little bit afraid, I'm really excited. I just published my 13th story yesterday. I signed a contract for a story yesterday.
Congratulations.
In Orion's Belt magazine. So I'm in a couple of anthologies, and then I'm in a couple of like nice magazines. And so I'm excited. And then of course, and then there's this book, which is so beautiful.
Well, that's great.
I'm proud of this book.
Well, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Well, I'll come back to you at the end with
great, thank
you. All of you.
Do you want to see my cat again? Should I put my cat on?
Sure. Make people wonder. I thought it was a graham cracker.
It does look like a graham cracker
cookie. Okay, let's turn to TJ Knight. If you want to turn on your camera. There you are. TJ Knight.
Tanya, real quick, I wanted to ask, the attendees and the panelists in the chat seem to be separated. We can't chat with each other. Is that a button you can push somewhere?
If there is, I'm not
We don't want to blow it all up.
They're not able to talk. They can, let me chat.
They can do Q&A.
There. They can do Q&A. Can they go in the chat?
The chat only lets me go to hosts and panelists, but it's been working. I've been answering questions in the Q&A.
Okay, I put everyone, so does that change it? You need to switch it on your end where it says two, then there's
Okay.
an option.
Hopefully they can do that. That's fine. All right, so back to hello.
Hello. TJ is the author of The Fall of Crodendra M.
There you go.
Okay.
You got it.
TJ's the pen name for a regular dude. You don't want me to give you a real name?
No, it's fine.
You can give your real name.
It's in the book actually, so it's visible in there.
Who lives in New York, upstate, not the city, surrounded by oaks and pines, deer and turkeys, a cat, son, wife, and on holidays, a daughter. You make soap. You're the first man I've met who makes soap. I know lots of women who do, but that's great.
It's a Tyler Durden thing.
He makes soap, bakes too many paleo brownies, reads, runs, and writes. His favorite authors are K.L. Going, Laini Taylor, and John Stakely or Steakley. I'm not sure how he pronounces it. While this may seem an eclectic group, he reads more for style than content, and oh, the style. You can find his flash everyday fiction, daily science fiction. His longer works appear in Future Finalists Publishing's Starlight series, where he served as editor for Volume 2. In his story, The Fall of Crodendra M. Now, these latter two stories really made me come up with a lot of questions. Anyway,
Good questions.
Crodendra M. He attempts to highlight the drawbacks of our evolving hyper-individualism. Technology allowed us to remain home and watch weddings, graduations, and funerals on screens, not to mention virtual author events like this. This quickly went from unheard of to accepted, and perhaps with normal coming soon. So, as more and more of our entertainment is streamed into our living rooms, whether it's from space or otherwise, this story explores the meaning of actually visiting a friend or loved one instead. So, first, he's got some characters in this story that he calls tuners. And why don't you tell them what they do for those who may not have read it? And then I want you to tell us how you conceived of the idea of these tuners and the apparatus they use, and if you based it on that system on anything we use at present.
The tuners, the idea, you can still hear me, right? After I put this on? Okay. I like the mixing of old technology and new. I loved the way they did that in the original Matrix movie with old televisions and futuristic things. So I like to try to mix the two of them. And so back in the old days, we used to tune our radios and they would say, tune in tomorrow night or something like that. And so I've kind of kept that going and made that the profession name for people who tune into finding entertainment in space. So the telescopes have gotten so strong that we can see all the way down to the planet and we can watch alien sports or alien vistas and there's thousands of channels that can lock in and then follow the planet around with watching whatever they're doing up there. And so I think that would take over anything we might do here. I mean, we're how many shows are on now, right? Netflix is full of shows.
Yeah.
So the tuner, just basically I tried to keep old-timey words whenever possible that would keep going, like a record store. I mean, there's not many of those left, but I still call it a record store there's no records, maybe some vinyls, but generally, I just love the idea that old words stay alive.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, okay. What is it about today's society that led you to think that in his story, the most popular events for people to watch are what they call wipeouts, where entire civilizations or planets are just obliterated by some event? So what led you to think that maybe those would be the most popular reruns among viewers in the future? What about today's society?
Yeah, I love the movie Idiocracy. It seems to hit a lot of accurate. I mean, even though it was a while ago, we might look at it and go, that's never going to happen, and it's happening. We're getting there. But I mean, look at the fascination we have with Pompeii now. If it was recorded, if somebody had recorded what happened, I mean, would we watch that? And would we watch it over and over again? And would we have watch parties or something, and tailgate parties of maybe not tailgate, maybe not outside. But imagine if there were, I mean, that's happening, I assume, or going to happen, or has happened 32 light years ago to planet XYZ. And so I just have a feeling that people would really tune in to watch those things, and however we were able to capture it. And in my story, they get more and more of our telescopes aimed at different parts of the planet so they can watch this from all angles. So I have a feeling that would be really popular.
Probably. I mean, look at the attention that was paid to the recent disaster with the submersible. Yeah. Okay, I loved, you had a line in the story, no one watches ads anymore. We've trained ourselves to ignore them. I love that line. And I thought, don't you think that's already true to some extent in present day society? And what do you imagine marketing companies, because the wonderful thing about science fiction and fantasy is you can just let your imagination go anywhere. And so many things from the present came from science fiction in the past. So what do you imagine as a science fiction writer, marketing companies and ad agencies will do next to overcome consumers' lack of interest in these ads that we see all the time?
I love that question. I also love that Star Trek: The Next Generation in 1989, they had tablets, and they would walk around handing each other it wasn't even a thought in our minds at that point, but now we have them. I think it's great. So yeah, I love that when I get an ad on my phone now, and I'm playing a game or something, I just do this. And I turn it down, and I wait, and I turn back again. So I mean, they interrupt, and I'm listening to music, and then suddenly somebody's talking to me. And so there's a certain amount that you can't avoid. And then the ads where if you buy something, the next thing you know, your stream is filled with that thing. And so it's all reactive. Yeah, it's all reactive advertising. So they have to kind of figure out what we want based on what we search or what we say. But one of the things that I would personally love is if we had I can't say the name of that particular device or it's going to come alive. But if we had one for scents, and a mist would come out and say, "Oh man, I could go for some chocolate or something along those lines," and then the smell would come out, and then we would go buy some or we would order some. And if these drones can deliver in an hour or half an hour, we could have this kind of thing as quickly.
Oh wow!
So that's what I want. I want the actual scent.
I hope some
of the item.
advertisers aren't listening to this, because my diet will go to heck if they produce something like that.
Yeah, we have to have it installed though, so we'd have to have it like on a coffee table in the middle of the room. And so we would say, "Give me a barbecued chicken smell with teriyaki sauce," and out it comes.
Okay.
But if advertisers can figure out how to be proactive instead of reactive, then we're in trouble.
Yeah. And I bet you they will. Um, okay, finally, if you could talk to us about the differences between in-person connection and connection in terms of virtual screens like what we're using right now. Your story really revolves around this. I'd like to hear how you would differentiate the two experiences and the pros and cons of each, particularly with regard to education today with students. Does virtual learning help or hinder them in the long run? So
I've seen lots of statistics recently saying scores are down for different age groups. The younger the age group, the more the scores have gone down because they were less able to not adapt, but just conform, I guess, to this medium. My son did really well in the first few months of the pandemic. We taught him here. They sent projects through. We went around the neighborhood doing different things. It was spring. So he did pretty well, but I think that there's a dent in the education across the world. There's going to be this kind of missing period of time.
yeah.
I think adults could probably do well because they're going to do it on their own anyway. It's like with college, you go to class for an hour and you come home and do 4 hours with the homework. So there isn't much of a difference if I sat here and watched my collegiate lecture and then did all my homework. I think that would be about the same. So as far as education goes, they just think the younger the folks are, the harder it would be to learn this way with attention spans being shorter anyway. Start staring off into space after a few minutes. What was the first part of the question?
The differences between in-person communication and connection versus screen.
I think it's definitely a blessing and a curse having these because in the old days, people got on their wagon and they headed out west. You probably never saw them again. That was it. And then the telephone came along and you could call, which is great. And now we have the screens and you can actually see people and engage and do things like this. But does it reduce the desire or will to go see them when you can do this? So that's a question. I mean, we love to travel, but now we travel on our own to go do what we want to do and see those things, maybe because we say, oh, I saw Uncle Charlie last week on Zoom, so I don't need to go see him. And so let's go to New Zealand or something, Greece. So yeah, so I don't know, but there's nothing wrong with that. Travel's brilliant. So it's a toss-up, I think, really.
Yeah.
It's individualized.
Yeah, we had some book clubs going in the store, and then the pandemic hit and we had to take everything virtual. And people got so used to the virtual that they wanted to continue it that way. But now some have come back. And so we've done both live and virtual. Well, and what are you working on now in terms of your writing?
I've actually got a trilogy going. And so I've got my notebooks for each one. So I write all my notes in here. So the green is book 1, go. Book 2 is we're getting there, and then this is the third one. So I know which one is which. So I got my notes in there, my chapter headings, my characters, and all that fun stuff. So hopefully that'll be done soon. And then I got to do the query letter process and agents and fingers crossed. So that's what I got going on.
Oh, cool. Are those? Do you write by hand in those?
Just my notes. It's kind of my process is to think, jot, type. So that's what I do. And so by the time I get to typing, I've got stuff ready. And so I can hopefully get a lot of words done in my limited typing window.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Finally, we're gonna move
Jason's
to
turn.
Yeah. And please put your questions. I'm sorry that I didn't activate. I don't know how to. It's all I've never. Okay. I don't know how to activate the someone else. No, that's Marianne to the hosts and panelists. put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them, okay, at the end. Let me introduce Jason Palmatier, and if I'm mispronouncing it, you can correct me. It's good? Okay. Author of Under My Cypresses. He's a stay-at-home dad who lives in central Pennsylvania with his wife and 3 sons. A former software developer, he now writes speculative fiction and has been fortunate enough to work on screenplays. He's got the short film The Hunter, independent comics, Lords of the Cosmos by Ugly Studios, graphic novels, Plague, published through Marcosia Enterprises in Limited, and short story anthologies from Zombies Need Brains, LLC. And he's also written full-length books. Oh, man, how many? Wow. How long have you been at this?
I've probably been writing about 13 years, about when my first, well, up to 14 now, because when my first son was born, I started really writing.
Oh, that's great.
Trying to write. Let me just put it that way.
Okay.
Not bad. You're trying to write when you have kids.
Okay. Well, when not trying to write, he enjoys introducing his kids to 1980s culture, encouraging his kids to be creative, and watching his kids ignore his advice. His story, Under My Cypresses, grew from a child's request. Was this one of your own children?
Yeah. Yeah, my youngest.
To his request to spend real cash on a skin for an in-game avatar. The skin provided no special powers, and it didn't open up another level of play. It simply changed the avatar's appearance. And to an old school parent like Jason, this sounded like a complete waste of money. But to the kid who spent hours each day smashing loot chests while clothed in their new otter skin, it was a very tangible upgrade to their gaming experience. To them, it was part of their reality, one which they shared with their friends. But it's not real. It's just a bunch of pixels and a couple of otter noises. True. But what if you could smell things like an otter? Touch things like an otter? Would it be real then? And who decides that? Your old school parent? The government? You? So this is really about reality, and how we perceive reality. So everyone is talking about AI these days. What with ChatGPT, the writer's strike in Hollywood, and even the beginning of that new Marvel movie. What's your personal take on AI? And is that reflected in your story, or do you try and stay neutral?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is I wrote that story before the whole AI thing kind of blew up. So when it started blowing up, I'm like, oh, everybody's talking about AI. I'm like, why is this? And then I heard about ChatGPT, which honestly, sadly, I hadn't really heard about before. So I write sort of social sci-fi. And so I don't write hard sci-fi stuff. So, with hard sci-fi, they would have been focused in on like how the AI functions and all, that kind of stuff. So for me, that's not as interesting to me as like, well, if it did function at whatever level, how would that affect society and people? And so, yeah, I didn't really do any AI research. And so I'm not actually, the state of AI right now, I'm not as familiar with as, you might think, since I wrote an AI story. So I guess I'm neutral due to ignorance of like what AI can do right now. But I do think that it's just the beginning, like this is the starting stage. When the few stories that I did read about like ChatGPT and what people have done with it, I'm like, okay, this is where AI starts to become what it can be. Because, prior to that, AI was kind of run in a lab, and they would, Google, whatever, had their things going, and they would have their developers, doing whatever they wanted, like feeding it data and doing that kind of stuff. And as a software developer, I know like the worst thing to do is try to like test your own code. And so they're going to make their own AI and then they're going to feed it stuff, but subconsciously they have biases of what they're feeding it that they don't know about and stuff. So But once the chat GPT stuff started, I was like, oh, they're letting like regular people just, interact with this and point it in different directions and stuff. So now the AI is going to get exposed to a whole bunch of just random stuff. And that's, I think, when it's really going to develop, is you're going to have, how many millions of people using chat GPT every day. That's like millions of testers, testing this AI and developing it. So I think the development, the advancement of AI will be very rapid from here on out. And I think that's, whether that's good or bad, I think some of your later questions will get into this, but yeah, whether it's good or bad, I don't really have an opinion on it right now.
Okay. Yeah. Do you think we're headed for a future where AI will be demanding equal treatment to humans and the kind of visibility that your story proposes or that your story presents?
Yeah, the funny thing about that is when I started the story, it was supposed to be a very simple story about like, one person, encountering AI in their life and how they would deal with it. But as I started writing it, all these questions popped up. And since it was a short story, I knew I couldn't really go into them. But, the questions that popped up are, in the story, an AI kind of exists in this state that you can't tell if you're talking to an AI or if you're talking to a real person. So like right now, I've never met you in person, you never met me, and it could be very easy for an AI to be on Zoom. It kind of ties into what you're talking about with Justin, right? On Zoom, you've never met them, they don't really exist, but you can, if they were advanced enough and you could talk to them and they could, act like a regular person, you would never really know. And today with working remotely, this also goes into your question to Dustin, I did software for a bunch of time, like 9 years, with kids at home remotely. I never met anybody that I was doing the software stuff with. And I realized, well, any one of them could have been an AI and I never would have known. And so I think that what's interesting about that is if you don't know if they're an AI and you're working with them and they're considered human, right? And you're interacting with them on a daily basis and they're doing a job that a person would do, then in the story, like there's a question of who owns the AI, which gets into a whole other social thing. But the AIs were getting paid to do a job, right? A company would pay an AI to do what a human would have been doing, like if there's tech support or something like that. So the interesting thing is once you pay an AI, then does the AI pay taxes? And if the AI pays taxes, then does the AI have the rights of somebody who, like a person? Because like people, that's usually when people start to say, I need a voice, is when like somebody says you need to pay into the system. And so I would think that eventually, if your AI is feeling like a person, like we were creating them to be artificial intelligence, which is obviously going to be our intelligence, because that's the only one we really know how to create, right? We're going to create it in our own image. So I would assume that they would be created, they would feel like they're human, they'd be doing a human job, they'd probably be paying human taxes. I would assume that they're going to want a voice and be recognized as an individual, which they would be, right? Because they would have their own experiences and everything.
Well, they'd certainly be functioning. And yeah, what would they use the money that they're getting paid for besides paying taxes because the government demands it?
Right.
Do they try and give themselves upgrades, or what do they?
Well, it's just like my son. It's like, oh, well, and just like us, it's like, well, I want to buy a suit and I want to look, I want to dress, or I want a suit, or I want something else like that. Well, the other thing that fed into the story that sort of probably is subconsciously feeding it is there was all those games back in the day, like Second Life, and people literally had like a life. They, you would log in and you had your own life on another server, and it was just virtual. But people paid real money to buy, fake things in real life. They would buy a house and they'd pay $80 to buy like their virtual house. And then they went, which is what my son was doing to get his avatar, an otter costume. He paid he had to pay Robux to buy an otter costume that didn't exist. And I'm like, well, an AI would certainly like to have different clothes, and they might have to, want earrings, and might want a different hairstyle. And there's certainly a company that's going to be happy to sell that to you online as a virtual, suit or haircut or something. And so I realized there's an entire economy that you know, certainly in the US, based on our, you know, capitalist system, somebody's like, yes, I will cash in on that and make AI type things or AIs. I mean, you can technically do it yourself, right? There's this weird thing where, yeah, I mean, if you're an AI, supposedly you should be able to go in and create your own, you know, set of clothes, right? The digital imaging or whatever that you need to make a set of clothes. So the question becomes, well, why don't you? And like in the real world, any of us could probably learn to be a seamstress or whatever and do this, but you don't do it because it takes so much time. And so the biggest thing is that computers and humans operate on different time scales, you know, because computers can do things super fast, right? And technically an AI could do it. So there's in the story, the idea that to create an AI, you have to make it live on a human time scale. So it would take them, you know, a month of work to make a nice suit digitally or something like that, right? You know, because there's some artificial thing that's keeping them from making it like that. And so that's the same thing that would make them spend their money on suit or a dress or earrings. So yeah.
Well, let's okay. So how do you, I am gonna skip to 4 and come back to 3. How do you imagine the government will end up regulating social media, AI, and the like? And there's probably something in the future that's even more far-reaching than AI
Yeah.
coming. But or is it impossible to regulate at this stage? I know that Biden held a press conference yesterday, I think, about, or the day before, about, you know, trying to regulate AI or so. Has the genie already been let out of the bag, out of the bottle?
Yeah. I think I'll knock down the social media one because I think that one is probably not, can't see it being regulated. And not running into, at least in the US, sort of a free speech thing, you know, like it's real hard for me to say, well, what regulations could the government make that wouldn't bump up against the idea that, you know, in the US, we can say whatever we want because on social media, we're kind of saying it. It's weird because it goes back to the question you skipped, but it's, you know, will there be regulations about saying something versus like faking something? So we'll get back to that. So, but I don't think that you can regulate just somebody sending out, you know, typing in and texting something, you know, or posting something. I think that would be hard. For AIs, I think the government will regulate them. The biggest point will become when like an AI can do your job, you know, because pretty much for me, I think I'm a software developer and I spend all my time, like if I'm working, I'm on my computer and I'm like, if you think of a job in which you don't produce something like physically with your hands or do something like that, then I believe you would probably be able to be replaced with an AI.
Well, yeah, that's part of the reason the writers are striking in Hollywood.
Right.
And
the one thing I haven't
writers,
seen,
so aren't you worried about this?
Yeah, I've not thought about it. The writing wise, they mentioned it at the conference and they were talking about, they're worried about getting AI generated stories submitted and that at some point they won't be able to tell the difference. And it's interesting to me because I'm like, well, that's fairly creative. I mean, software development's creative too, but it's also very, you know, it's like, it's scoped, you know, because there's a specific software language and there's syntax and all that kind of stuff. So you have to kind of, I can see an AI being able to do that. Though it is creative in some sense. So the real question is, can an AI be created that is itself creative from whatever? And I mean, it sort of is because you give it prompts and it comes up with stuff.
Yeah, it's like what Marianne started with the prompt.
Yeah.
John Green, I think, posted recently on his Facebook or Twitter, and I think his remark was, "Oh my God!" And he had a screenshot of what Chat GPT had come up with for a storyline for him, and the first thing it came up with, he says, "That's not really my style. Oh, let me try again," and it did, and it was like.
Yep. So it is. And part of the question is, you know, people are like, oh, well, you know, an AI generated it, like for art too. But the big thing that got me too on the story was the fact that when the first AI generated art came out and some people had put it on their books, within the sci-fi and fantasy community, there's kind of an uproar about using that cover, and not going with it. But that got me thinking. I'm like, well, how'd the AI generate it? Well, you gave it some prompts. It went out to the internet and found some images and everything, and then generated its own images. I don't think it pulls the images and puts it in there. It takes them, looks at them, analyzes, 100 horses, and then it draws its own horse and it puts it on there, right? But I'm like, well, technically that's what artists do, is that they go and they find all these pictures of horses and and then they draw it with their own hand. So it's not a copy, but it is, based on that. And they put it together in some artistic way. I'm like, oh, well, I mean, that would be art. I mean, a computer made it, but they did what an artist would do, and they created it. And how they draw it, I don't know, but so I'm like, well, that is art. Technically, it's a computer generated art, but it is art. Where people are saying that wasn't art. And then I'm like, well, same with a short story. If a computer can generate a short story that can win a contest, is it bad? I mean,
is it bad?
But it's a story, and it was good enough that some judges read it and thought it was great, and right? It's a very interesting question.
Yeah. Okay. The one I skipped, in this age of deep fakes and a seeming acceptance of, or at least a shrug by many to lies from politicians and leaders in the public sphere, how do you think mankind will adapt and not lose its sanity? Has truth become inconsequential? And this is maybe too deep for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't go into that, like, sort of the truth side thing in the story, but the story does get to this point of, like you mentioned it, it's talking about what like reality is. And everybody's reality is different. Like even you and I, like your day today so far has been totally different than mine. So if somebody asked you what today was like, you would describe something totally different than I would describe. And so we've operated in two different realities. So the idea that, like, somebody can create like a deep fake video, and it's interesting in the story, that's the main character's job, is they're supposed to point out, like, find, false stuff on the internet. Like, was this video real? And they're supposed to watch it and try to figure out if it's real or not, or if there's little things that have been tweaked. And I don't know. You essentially choose your own reality nowadays with social media, kind of like what PJ was saying, is that if you're on something and you buy a certain product, now your feed's going to be filled with those products. And then if you click on a certain story, your feed will be that. So it kind of condenses your reality down to something based on what you've done in the past. And then you kind of get yourself funneled into that based on what you choose to look at online or to buy and do that kind of stuff. And I think that rolls into these deep fake videos and stuff, because you're going to choose whether you believe the deep fake video or not, because it's going to look real. You know what I mean? Like, you have to decide if that's real. We went through, I think, an age of, like, prior to videos, pictures, you had to believe the person.
And you believed the radio, and then you believed the television.
Right. And then now we've moved, and there was this point where it's like, well, that's a real picture because it's a picture, and you just believe that it was a real picture. And if you saw it on the TV and it was a video, you said, okay, that had to be real because it was on TV and it was video. And then we get to a point where we're like, there's the whole, what's that, for the JFK assassination, they have the picture of the guy holding the gun with a pamphlet, and it looks pretty fake. Whether it's fake or not, I'm not going to say, but it looks pretty fake that he's holding like some fanned out pamphlets and a gun. And that was the first time it's like, well, there's a photo, and we usually trust photos, but you trust that photo. Was that a real one or was it fake? And so that sort of started, I feel like, for me, when I saw that photo when I was younger, I was like, I don't know, that looks a little sus, as the kids would say. And so from then on, I was like, oh yeah, a photo can kind of be fake. And then eventually, especially now with computer stuff, a video can be faked. And our movies are essentially all fake, except for the live actors that do a little bit of it. So I think we've gotten back to that. What I guess I mean is, like, we've gotten back to a stage where seeing something, a picture or video, or hearing something doesn't mean anything anymore. It's back to the individual. You have to look at it and decide, do you believe it or not?
Yeah.
Based on what you know or feel about the person or event or whatever that it's about.
Yeah.
Which is weird. Because,
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't think it's going to be very far in the future where video evidence won't be submittable in court or something, if it's from, an unknown source or something, right? So,
okay, I looked in the Q&A, and first of all, you have a nice bookshelf, Jason.
oh, thank you.
And Nina Hoffman said, this has been fascinating. Thanks so much, Tanya, Marianne, TJ, and Jason. Lots of interesting questions and answers. She has to go. So I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. And I've just got...
I noticed that somebody has their hand raised. I think Joni has her hand raised.
Joni.
Yeah, Joni Labaki. Did I see that or did I make that up?
Oh, allow to talk.
Oh, it's gone.
Okay. Joni, why don't you... Do you have a question? If you unmute yourself. Maybe she's not here anymore.
Sorry.
Oh, well. Okay. Where did I find her? Well, okay.
I just want to say real quick, since we're at a brief pause here, that Jason, I see armor on your bookshelf back there.
Oh, he said
And
she said Stakely. I'm like, I think there's only 2 books by Stakely that I know.
Yes, there's 2. He wrote
Yep.
2 books. That was I've read them so many times. There it is.
How can you
There it is.
see that from there?
Right, and this I picked this up at the Penn State used book sale for, I have no idea, it's rubbed off, probably like 50 cents. I just picked it up.
Yeah.
Guy in armor. I love Robotech, which I have all the books down here.
Yeah.
So anything in armor, and so I saw this. I was like, what's that? And I bought it and I read it, and I was just like, what is going on? This is like a crazy good book. In the middle,
crazy good.
Like, what just happened? Like, why am I reading this news story? But then it all ties together, and you're just like, this is one of the best books that.
Yeah.
Books I've ever
And I'll tell you, I've taken the bold step. I've reached out to friends of John's family because he's deceased.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to reach them to see who has the rights to that, to see if I can write the sequel based on his notes. And it's very bold, but
yeah,
that's what I want. I would put life on hold to write that.
Good
Yeah,
luck.
the only problem with being a John Stakely fan is this and the vampire thing that they made and that's it. And you're just like, first time I was like, oh, I see why people are like, I want an author who's written a lot of books. Because when you find one, you want to keep reading it, and then they only have 2. You're like,
Well, and I'm also seeing Jason in 2 days. I'm going to be doing a signing with him, so we can chat more about that then.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted.
Where's the signing going to be? Is it in Pennsylvania?
Where's the signing?
It's a Barnes and Noble in State College, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Okay. I wanted to know briefly, how did you hear about this contest? How old were you when you learned about this contest, or how many years ago? And what has winning it done for your career? Marianne?
I'll go first. I was 64 years old when I first heard about this contest, and I took a writing workshop with Nina Hoffman, who just left, unfortunately. And she is a big support. She's actually one of the judges, as you might know. And so and also I know somebody named Eric Witchie. I'm friends with him. He's another writer. He's a former winner. And they both gave me the advice to take your best story every quarter and send it in. Then just do it. Just take your best story and send it in. So I started 2 years ago, and I sent in my first one was a finalist, and then I got some honorable mentions, and then finally I got the win. But when I was a finalist twice, because I was a finalist once and didn't win, and then I was a finalist and won, both times Nina had to recuse herself from the judging because she had read the story, so she wasn't allowed to judge on it. But so that's how I found out. And this has been a wonderful boost. I think if nothing else, it teaches me how to be a professional. how to take my work seriously and to understand that it has worth and that other people want to read it. It's helped me maybe sell a couple of other stories, but I think the biggest lesson has been internal of it's very hard, they have this, people will have imposter syndrome, or they think, oh, this was an accident. And, somebody liked my story, but it was an accident. And this has really taught me that, no, this, the work that I do is worth putting out there in the world. So that's what it's done for me. It's been really a gift. I appreciate it.
TJ, how about you?
Okay, yeah, so I found out about it ages ago. I think I purchased volume 4 or 5 in the bookstore way back in the day. So, and I filled out that little card that's in there, and I mailed that in, and I got my bookmark and all that stuff. So it was kind of always on the back. But you got volume 5 there? What do you got? Oh yeah, that's it.
Okay.
So I sent that in. So I've kind of been there for forever, but I didn't start submitting until around 12, 13 years ago, and I racked up 32 entries. This was my 32nd entry. And so I want to also have here's my picture.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Of course, you guys can see that in the book, but I got my big copy of it here. And yeah, so I had 2 finalists previously. This was my 3rd, 2 semifinalists, 10 honorable mentions, 9 silver honorable mentions. So I got all kinds of certificates. I could plaster the wall with them. So yeah, so I've been around the block with this contest, but what it means to me, I guess, is just that it's time to write my novel. I love writing novels. I love the process of it. I love sitting here in the morning with my coffee and it's dark out and my headset's on and I'm listening, and I just love that. So with the short stories, I think you had asked that question about short stories, and I like them okay, but then in 5,000 words they're over. And then I have to think of something else. But with a novel, you think of an idea, and then you can just describe what's going on, the world, the characters, the journey. That it's so much bigger and so much more fun. So, and 3, that's even more fun, because why write 1? Write 3 at the same time. That's even better. So that's where I'm at.
That's great. Jason.
Yeah, I learned about the contest probably about 13 or 14 years ago, because I started writing, and then my older brother's actually a novelist, and he writes fantasy novels that were published by Daw many years ago. So like, see, here it is. Yeah, his first book was A Skewed Throne, and so there's like a 3-book series, and then and I got this used sale. Don't look at that. And so he said, when I started writing, he was like, well, I was trying to write novels. And he said, well, why don't you write short stories and just get, because you can submit it to this contest. I was like, what? And he's like, and that'll give you every 3 months, they do quarterly. So every 3 months you could submit, and then the next 3 months you could submit another story. He says, so that'll give you like a timeline, like a deadline to write a story for. And so I did for a while. Probably wrote 5 or 6 stories and submitted them, and I never got any honorable mentions or anything like that. And then finally I decided that I wanted to write novels, and didn't really do the short stories. But I had a friend who moved down to LA, and he was like, let's do screenplays. And so I got sidetracked doing screenplays with him. And then I went back to books, and then I got sidetracked with the comics, and I went all that. And then my brother started Zombies Need Brains as his small press. And he was like, submit stories to the slush pile. And so I started to, most of which got rejected, but that got me into, yeah, it's my brother. And
by your brother.
I know, I got some in there, but so that got me back into writing short stories. And after COVID, I started going back to conventions. I had only gone to a couple, and I went to a convention and met the editor for Asimov's. Sheila had like a coffee clash. And so in talking to her, I decided to write a short story that wasn't just for zombies. I was just going to write one straight out. And that's the one that I wrote. And then they rejected it. And then a couple other places rejected it. And then Joni's email, I was still on the mailing list, 14 years later, came in and said, oh, the deadline's in 3 days, so submit a story. And so I was like, all right. So I, formatted it the way they wanted it and sent it in. And then I won what I won. And it was very surprising to have won. I just did it on a whim. But I wouldn't have, I don't think, if I hadn't written all those other short stories.
Yeah.
And
Well,
what it did really is, like, my brother had published some of my short stories, but I hadn't really been published elsewhere. And the other stuff I'd done was sort of indie stuff where I just bumped into people and wrote stuff with them. So it didn't make you go, okay, I can call myself a writer now. Like, before, I didn't really feel like I could call myself a writer, even though I had this stuff out there. So in the end, I was like, oh, somebody outside my family or people that I just kind of ran into, chose my story and said it was good. And you had people like Dean Wesley Smith and Jody Lanai, all these people saying, yeah, it was a great story. There's no changes needed. You're good to go. And you're like, wow, okay, I guess I'm legit. So that was the biggest boost. And then the other one is, like Marianne said, you see how it works as far as like the publicity of it and how you just how you interact with people and you get to know people. Like, now you have a network of people who from the winners group that you went to the conference with and stuff, and you see how you can build that up into sort of a career in writing. So yeah, that's that sort of that professionalism that you get to see.
Well, that's great. Marianne, you wanted to
I
go
wanted
ahead.
to add something to that. The first time I was a finalist, and it's like I wasn't writing, and then I was an artist, and then I actually got really sick, right? So then while I was getting better, I started writing. So I was taking classes with Nina, submit this story, and then in the middle of something, I get a call from Joni Labaki telling me I'm a finalist, and I didn't expect it. And I realized that week, people whose books I bought were going to be reading my story. And then, okay, so 2 years later, it happened again, but then I was up for the grand finalist. And I'm going to hyperventilate. I realized that more people whose books I bought, and I knew who they were. I knew their names, and I was meeting people whose stories I loved, and they were reading my story and judging it. And that's okay. But it made me, all of a sudden, I thought, boy, if I don't think of myself as a writer now, I will never think of myself as a writer. This is the moment when professionals come and evaluate your work and tell you what they think of it. And like Dean was complimentary. Joni, I was told, sung the name of my story. Joni Lynn Nye is a dragon person. And so I think she was really happy to get a dragon story in the mix. So she was running around, singing Moonlight and Funk one day, I'm told. But I just went away, and I thought, okay, if I am not now taking myself serious as a writer, this is the moment to, because it's very, and all of us, the people who read like this, the people who selected this book they're the writers I read. So that's a really exciting thing.
Yeah. Well, if there's a couple things I'm taking away from this is hang in there for the long game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if this hasn't whet your appetite to go out and get a copy of this book, I don't know what would, because these are fabulous stories. And I didn't have time to put it in the chat because I've been talking and listening so much. But I'm going to send out an email after the end of this with a link to the recording and a link to the ordering page on our website where you can order the book. I think this is all we have time for. So I want to just thank you both, all of you, Marianne, TJ, Jason, and good luck in all of your writing. And please, if you get published, think about doing an event here at the Book Bungalow.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of those who joined us today. I'm sorry I didn't have chat enabled, but have a great day. Stay well.
Thanks, Tanya.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It's awesome.
This was great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.